In this lesson, we'll be looking at diplomacy. We're continuing our conversation of foreign policy and learning how the United States government interacts with other countries around the world. This lesson will focus on diplomacy, which is when a country interacts with other countries or groups through discussion. So just by talking to other countries, the United States is engaging in what's called diplomacy. So diplomacy, again, just talking with other countries. So our objectives is we're going to understand the meaning of foreign policy. We're going to be able to describe types of foreign policy. Our essential questions: what types of foreign policy are there, and how does foreign policy impact the relationship of the U.S. government with the governments of other countries? So we've been looking at ways that the United States government interacts with itself and with its citizens, with us. And we've been trying to understand our place in that role in those relationships. But what we're looking at now is how the United States interacts with other countries around the world and why they do that and what that has to do with our daily lives. So the two types of foreign policy that we'll talk about in the next two lessons are diplomacy and actions. Diplomacy is when two or more countries use discussion and talking to reach a solution to a problem. An example would be the United States and several other nations signed an agreement to reduce the amount of pollution. So they sat down, they talked probably for weeks, and had meetings, and eventually decided that they were going to do something about pollution and signed an agreement about it. That would be diplomacy, just talking about a problem and coming up with a solution just by talking. Actions are different. Actions are when it goes beyond talking. When one or more countries decides to take direct action with another country. So what does direct action mean? It means just when you do something beyond talking. There's an actual action that is done. For example, the United States and several other nations decided to use their militaries to invade the country Iraq in 2003. They invaded to get rid of the government led by Saddam Hussein, who was labeled as an unfair leader. So that's an example of action. Those countries tried diplomacy in other years and in other times, but diplomacy did not work. So they decided to use action, and they used their militaries to try and achieve their objective, which was to get rid of Saddam Hussein. That's an example of action. So what's the difference between these two? Diplomacy, just talking. Actions, there's something actually done. Something is actually done to get to a solution to a problem. So what are all the types of diplomacy? We will look at those. I'm just going to bring an arrow in here to help you guys see them. So what I'll do is I'll go through each one of these. I'll tell you the type. There'll be a picture in the middle column to kind of just show you, what the term looks like in picture. And then there'll be a definition on the last column. So let's go through them one by one. First thing is a treaty. And a treaty is just a piece of paper that a bunch of countries sign. It's like an agreement or a contract. Two or more countries make a formal agreement to do something or not do something. So they just sign a piece of paper that says they're going to do something or they're going to stop doing something. That's what a treaty is. It's like a contract. Independent. When a country decides to act independently, they decide that they're just going to deal with a problem on their own. After talking, that's what they decide. So countries' leaders make a decision to deal with the problems alone instead of working with other countries. That's independent. Negotiations. You've probably heard this word before. Negotiations are just when a bunch of countries, just like you see in the picture here, they get together. If they're dealing with the same problems, they come together to figure out possible solutions to the problem. The solutions would involve all the countries. So it's when they all sit down and figure out what they're going to do about a problem. And every country that's involved in the negotiations will have some kind of role in fixing the problem. Last one is mediation. So like the mediator in this picture would be this guy in the green right here. What this guy in the green is doing is trying to figure out how that he can help whatever's happening between this blue guy and this yellow guy. So he's the mediator. He's the one that's saying, look guys, let's sit down and talk and figure out what's wrong, try and come up with a solution. That's what mediation is. So when you call in a third party or a third person, try and help you solve your problem. And the third person is supposed to just help you out and not take sides. read the definition to you. Two countries having a problem ask a third country or some other organization to help them solve the dispute. Often this involves applying international law to the situation. So it's just when two countries or two groups are having problems and they call in a third group to kind of get another perspective and help them fix the problem. Alright, so have you ever heard of any of these things in your life, or are these things that you can consider using if you ever find yourself in conflict with people? Let's go through some examples. So imagine you're not getting along with a friend. Something that's happened to all of us. You're just not going along. Something happened between you two. That's a conflict. So how can that conflict be solved? What does that have to do with some of the things that we talked about on the previous slide? Let's go through each one. So a treaty. That would be like if you and your friend came up with agreements and contracts that said that you're not going to do something or you're going to try and do something better. Like if you're mad at your friend for not calling you when you guys went to the movies, and you decided from now on you're always going to let each other know what you're doing on Saturday night. That would be an agreement. That would be something that you guys would come up with to try and fix that problem. If you acted independently, that meant that you acted alone and tried to do something that will help you and your friend get along. So maybe you did something to try and improve the relationship. Maybe you bought your friend a present or something like that. That would be an example of acting independently. Negotiations, we've probably all done this. We just didn't call it negotiations. It'd be like if you just sat down with your friend, or maybe send them a text message or something like that, and you're just discussing why you aren't getting along and trying to fix it. So if you're just having a conversation about the problem and trying to fix the problem, that would be negotiations. Mediation, some of us have probably used this before, and it's actually very, very effective when you're trying to solve conflicts and disputes. That'd be like if you and your friend called in the third friend, and that third friend's supposed to stay in the middle and tries to just help you guys work things out. And that can be tough for that third friend sometimes, but it's something that can be very helpful in solving a problem. So how can you remember all this stuff and what diplomacy means? Just think about diplomacy like talking. Anytime that you're trying to solve a conflict or a dispute and you talk about it, that's diplomacy. Countries do the same thing. They sit down and they just talk and try to reach solutions to problems just through talking. Just involves conversations about issues and how to fix them. So what about war? Because whenever we think about foreign policy and like interacting with other countries, people just kind of instinctively just think about war and fighting. Are they diplomacy? No, they're not. Diplomacy is usually what people and countries try to use to avoid war and fighting. So talking first is what is used to try and avoid war, to make sure that doesn't happen, because countries don't want to go to war. If that doesn't work, that's when a war or fighting begins. Any war that you've seen, there's been talking before that war actually happens. It's when that talking goes bad, or one of the sides decides that they don't want to talk anymore, that war happens. We'll talk about war in the next lesson when we talk about actions. But for now, please make sure you answer the questions that are underneath of this video. If you have any questions, please reach out. If not, good luck.